Good morning, people. Urban Sentinel. This video is a what-if scenario, and I have covered the topic before, war with Russia and China, and I'm going to narrow down in on a few key things that I've been picking up on the internet, looking at some of the articles, watching some of the videos from the different outlets and things like that. First off, tensions are still high with Russia and Ukraine and Russia and NATO and that entire situation. There's a lot of back and forth. There is the usual antics of, well, we'll do this if they do that, but if they're going to do this, then we might do that type of thing. Basically, a lot of still political posturing across the board from both aspects of this entire situation, both with Russia to Ukraine, NATO to Russia, Russia to NATO. It's just moving all around. The key thing you have to think about is, one, there is a precedent of, we'll call it coincidence, that the last two times that Russia made incursions into other Eastern European countries was during an Olympic event. We have this year's Olympics coming up in China. So there's the possibility that, again, because the world's attention is to a certain extent focused on the Olympics, the big distraction, the entertainment, they're less focused on the political aspects and ramifications, especially for countries where it doesn't immediately affect them. Now, putting that off to the side, should Russia decide that they are going in, that they are going to do a full incursion, my opinion is, based upon everything that's been discussed, there are multiple ways that they could do it. The first would be a cyber attack, which Russia has been accused of, or evidence has led it to be shown that they were responsible or allowed cyber attacks to happen in other situations. They do a cyber attack, maybe interrupt communications, interrupt some of the infrastructure, the network, do a little destabilization across the country. That could be immediately followed up or worked in conjunction with insurgents or behind the scene special operators that are already in the country waiting to physically attack certain key infrastructure points, whether it be the highways, rails, communication lines, to get rid of hard targets or to soften them up in lieu of the impending attack. Now, of course, NATO and the allies will then make their response, but you have a large Russian force, 120,000 plus soldiers spread across different areas along the border. They're not just going to come in on one single road all in a row like a whole series of column of ants. They're going to be hitting from different directions in the country along the eastern border where it is with Russia, going all the way down to the south towards its western end, more or less pinching in at certain points, forcing the Ukrainian army and the Ukrainian Civil Defense Force to either hold them off long enough for hopefully NATO to come in and help them, or at least focus their attention on the key areas where they feel the Russians are moving in. Now, from that, not going into any other type of military strategy, tactics, and things of that sort, what we have to focus on is the effects that we should expect here for us. Personally, I believe that should Russia just outright attack and go in and invade, that's going to be a little bit of the shock and awe. But in the broader sense of what goes on, expect goods and services that are global and international, especially coming out of Europe, Central and Eastern Europe, to stop. Expect any imports, things leaving from us going into them, or rather exports from us going into them, to also stop, because we're going to immediately halt any type of trade. That means, to one extent, we're going to halt trading with a country that we may make an exchange of goods, but then that country would have an exchange of goods with Russia. So we're going to stop and just not give anything, because we don't want to add or assist Russia in any way, shape, or form if they're going to do an attack. So you're going to have a halt of goods and services, so it really puts a stranglehold on the supply chain that we have as it is right now, because at this point, when you have that type of conflict, especially in that area, it can spread very quickly from just Russia and Ukraine into the other nearby surrounding countries. The other aspect of it is China. China hasn't given up on Taiwan. They haven't made a big deal about it. They've been playing that, oh, Taiwan, yeah, it's whatever it is. But I also feel that because the Olympics are being held in China and it's still a big PR thing, China isn't immediately going to take direct action during the Olympics. There's talk that Putin and Xi Jinping had conversations, and perhaps the Chinese president say, hey, dude, just chill it during the Olympics, and then, we got your back afterwards. So it may be a case of the Olympics goes by without a hitch. It is what it is, and that's the way it goes. But then immediately after, Russian troops could start rolling in, or certain cyber attacks may start happening, going on at that point. If that's the case with Russia, either way, China could use that as their opening to go after Taiwan. And they may have a setup along the same similar lines where, because Taiwan is an island area, they can't exactly put ground troops on the border. So they would have to a certain extent, knock out communications, gain air superiority, and then do a marine landing. So you're going to have naval vessels and ships, and perhaps paratroopers coming in, dropping in directly into Taiwan to seize critical areas and infrastructure to assist in that invasion. That's, again, another large process that you can't really predict how it's going to go. But again, once that happens, expect our supplies to be interrupted, because China as a country exports a lot of stuff all around the world. And Taiwan, even by itself, is involved with a lot of the processing for a lot of the goods and materials that we get here. So once again, our supplies here could stop. I don't know if it's permanent or would be permanent, but I would expect that there to be an almost immediate halt of any shipping and trading going in those areas with easily, several hundred miles. You don't want cargo vessels unnecessarily traveling through potential war zones. So expect what is on the shelf in your retail stores, what are in the warehouses right now, and even the stuff that's still making its way from the ports, to be the last of the supplies. Now, how long that goes on, I don't know. The next aspect with that, with China and with Russia, the interruptions here, again, we are at a tipping point with our own internal stability. If we get an interruption where we know that for the next 2 weeks, there aren't going to be any new supplies coming in, where businesses, large and small, that rely on global international trade lose 20, 30, 40% of effectively their profit, because they can't export what they need to get the money in from those sales, or they can't import what they need to then make the goods and the items here to then sell to the public. The other aspect with this is Russia and China have both been prepping. The easiest way to put it. China, from what I understand, has been stocking up and storing up grain and other goods. Russia, they've been doing the same. To a certain extent, both countries by themselves as nations hold roughly 30 to 40% of the overall bulk content of either fuel and natural resources for energy, and grains and food. So if a conflict occurs and production stops and other countries can't ship out and get shipments in, China's holding large amounts of grain to feed its own citizens, and possibly to dole out to other countries to kind of keep them in line. Same with Russia. There are talks about, sanctions against them, but realistically, for the fuel and the resources they have, there are more countries, especially in the wintertime, that will bend the knee to them and either not interfere, or to a certain extent assist them in kind of keeping NATO off to the side if they needed it. But again, those are political moves, and it's a whole different chessboard altogether. From the end of preppers here, I've talked in other videos about having a 3-month supply, which is still the prudent thing to do. But go through everything that you've got, especially if you're new to prepping and you're watching this video and you've watched other videos. Go through what you normally would buy during a week. Look at what that is, and to the best of your financial ability, double that. And then the following week, try to double that one more time, because effectively, it's either going to be something really big during the Olympics or immediately after. So this month of February, that's all we have, potentially speaking. This month of February is all we have, with a potential conflict that could start during the Olympics or immediately after, going into, let's say, the very beginning of March. So within the first week of March, something could go down. So it would be more prudent to have your supplies to last you at least minimum 3 weeks without any problems, that you would use those supplies to get through. Now, certain things are hard to do. For example, fuel. If you've got a car and you have to drive to work and there's no way to bus, or the timing is inconvenient for you to have to leave 45 minutes earlier to walk to a bus stop and spend an hour on the bus to get to work, versus you drive to work and you're there within 20-25 minutes, I understand that. And if you're living in a place, let's say an apartment or something, where you can't stack up gallons worth of fuel, again, resources and availability for you, you're not going to be able to keep your fuel on hand. But at the minimum, if you do have a car, Cold War rules: keep your tank no less than half full at all times. Once it gets past that quarter tank down and it gets a little bit lower, start thinking about topping it up. Because two main reasons: one, less fuel to put in, it's going to cost you a little bit less, and 99% of all the vehicles out there, they run better above a half a tank. It's one of those Marvel mysteries. Doesn't matter what type of car it is, you get your best gas mileage from a full tank going down to 3/4. You get average mileage from 3/4 to half, but then once you cross that half, it can go to shit real quick. So at the minimum, keep your tank half full. If you have the ability to store up fuel, at least have enough, if it's just your vehicle, for, let's say, 2 gallons to 5 gallons, depending upon the amount of space or the size of your vehicle, that may be enough that if you have to leave, can get you out. You want to be able to at least leave and get away from the area if you have to bug out for whatever reason. In terms of food and supplies, that is, again, it's a personal choice. It's what you would normally consume. You want to try to get things that, if you don't have power and you don't have the means to generate power, that you can effectively eat out of the box, eat out of the can as it is. If you do have a way to heat and cook things, then great, that's fine. You continue to buy what you need to buy, but keep enough on hand for a minimum of 3 weeks, again, working up to the goal of 3 months. That's the key primary area, because if something should happen, unlike the war in Iraq and in Afghanistan, those were smaller, isolated areas, completely surrounded. The ripple effect, as it were, was not global. It was regional to that area. So we didn't, cost of bread didn't go up because of the Afghan war for the last 20 years that had been going on. It had nothing to do with it. Whereas China and Russia are two major superpowers. They're on par globally in the gross domestic product range, that when they stop producing, or they stop exporting, or they start raising the prices of goods and services that they've been providing to dozens of other countries, that has an effect all the way across the board. So we're going to see less shipments coming in and more price hikes on the shelf when you do get it. So from that point there, that's what I feel that we really need to focus on as preppers individually, and within your community, your family, your friends, that sort of thing. Try to get a feel, get an idea of how you're going to circle the wagons if you need to, because when it happens, we're going to be the last ones to know. There are plenty of cases where you have insider information. I don't have that. I'll get an alert on my phone from one of the media outlets. I'll scroll and see something on the internet. Maybe I'm watching TV and it's, the news at 6, but that's it. So when something occurs, we as individual people aren't going to know. So if we're not prepared, then when everyone else and all the rest of the masses find out and they go, that light goes on, goes, oh, this is really happening, we need to get ready. You're going to have a mad rush of people trying to gather supplies, trying to get their goods, trying to get everything that they think that they need right then and there. And it's going to be just like it was in the beginning of the pandemic, but more so, because now you've got people that remember, which, how can you forget what you had to go through in the very beginning of the pandemic to get supplies, to get food, to get toilet paper, to get all those things that used to be on the shelf all the time. Now there's less of it. just right off the top, there's 30-40% less of it available in most places. And then you add the mad rush of a potential war that, to a greater extent, we don't know where it could go. It could remain isolated just there within those two nations, just between them, or it could spread out and escalate and go to a whole different level. Anyway, that's the what if scenario that I want you guys to think about, and I'll probably do a follow-up video, maybe something else working with the prep supplies and a few other things that I've got going. But until then, like, share, and subscribe, and I'll catch you later.